Whoa, sorry about that. Welcome into a special edition of the Oxford Exxon Podcast. I'm Neal McCready. In this episode, I get you ready for Saturday's game in Tuscaloosa between number 15, Ole Miss, number 13, Alabama, kickoff set for 2:30 p.m. I'll visit with three guests: Ryan Brown of The Next Round, Tony Tsoukalis of TideIllustrated.com, and former Alabama linebacker Cory Reamer, now a part of the Crimson Tide Sports Network. Please make the Oxford Eagle and Blue Sky a part of your football weekend. Stop by the Oxford Exxon on Highway 6 West in Oxford. You can fill up outside, grab some ribs inside. You also can check out their fantastic beer cooler. It's 34 degrees of sudsy goodness. You'll love it. Please check it out. Make that a part of your weekend and tell the people at the Oxford Exxon how much you appreciate them sponsoring the show for almost a decade now. We're certainly appreciative. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford's in Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900. Call that number. Ask for Cory Clark. Tell Cory what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. It's right to the bottom line. There's no hassle. There's no haggle. You get your quote. The rest completely up to you. You can shop that quote around. You can do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. Cory and the people at Clark Ford, they want to be your car guy. They want to be your truck guy. They'll prove to you what that means when you make the call. 662-257-1900. All guests join on the Campbell Clinic hotline. The Campbell Clinic is in Oxford now, 2608 South Lamar Boulevard, Suite 102, just across the street from the cottages at Hooper Hollow. The Campbell Clinic provides full-service orthopedic care, everything from sports medicine to foot and ankle surgery to spine and total joint care and pediatric orthopedics and physical therapy. To book an appointment, go to campbellclinicoxford.com or call 901-759-3111. Walk-ins always welcome at the Campbell Clinic, Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're also presented by Twisted Tea. Are you ready to elevate your college football game day experience? Check out Twisted Tea, your go-to game day beverage for college football fans. Twisted Tea is unlike any hard beverage you've had before. It's made with real brewed tea, packs a flavorful punch, 5% alcohol, no carbonation, delivering the perfect balance of taste and refreshment that goes down smooth for every game day occasion. There's no need to settle for the usual. Twisted Tea turns up any occasion, especially when you're cheering for your favorite team. Whether you're tailgating in the stadium parking lot, watching at a bar, or hosting friends at home, Twisted Tea is there to elevate game day experience. It perfectly complements your love for college football, your passion for creating unforgettable moments. So let's toast to unforgettable game day experiences with Twisted Tea, the drink that fuels fun and celebrates your love for college football. Keep it twisted. So I'm going to run these one after the other. I'm not going to transition. I introduce them when we get started, so you'll be able to follow along. If you're listening to this in podcast form, it won't be a problem. And if you're watching, it'll be seamless. So we'll start off with Ryan Brown, then we'll go to Tony Tsoukalis, then we'll go to Cory Reamer, and I'll be back at the end of that to bid you adieu and get ready for what should be an absolutely fascinating college football weekend highlighted by Ole Miss and Alabama. So to get that started, here's Ryan Brown of The Next Round. Ryan Brown of The Next Round in Birmingham, kind enough to spend some time with us here on, I guess we're taping this on a Wednesday afternoon. You guys will probably see this on Thursday or Friday. Ryan, first of all, thanks for being in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always fun, Neal. You doing all right?
I'm doing good. So it's been a full week here. So it's half a weekend, but it feels like a full week. I'll start here because Lane Kiffin on Sunday drew some attention when I think he planted a question with the local media about, I know. I can't prove that. I can't prove it, but I think it's true.
Right.
If not, it was one hell of an astute observation by a media member that typically does not participate in the teleconferences. So he said that he believed, based on his experience at Alabama and his experience coaching against Alabama and coaching against Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator at Alabama, that it was not Kevin Steele calling the plays at Alabama, that it was Travaris Robinson. You just had Jeff Collins, you guys, at The Next Round. You and Jim Dunaway, Lance Taylor, you had Jeff Collins in studio on Wednesday. Jeff comes on my show, McCready and Siskey, every Monday and is a very astute defensive mind, former head coach at Temple, head coach at Georgia Tech, former defensive coordinator at Mississippi State, Florida, other places. also a former Alabama personnel director, so someone that has a knowledge of how things work inside Nick Saban's castle, if you will. And so, what did he say?
It was an interesting conversation too. Jeff, I mean, he's just a great football mind. You could sit and talk football with him, and I don't know football. He does. So, I mean, he's educating me, obviously. And my question to him was, all right, an experienced coach like Lane Kiffin, look, and Jeff even said it, we all know what Lane's trying to do, but an experienced coach like him, do you think it would be that obvious that he could sit down and watch film with no other prior knowledge and say, you know what? Somebody different is calling defense right there. That's not what Kevin would do. And he said, potentially, but let me tell you what I did. He goes, when Lane said that, he goes, I saw it, obviously. And he goes, I know all the principles involved here. He said, so I just went to the coach's film. And he said, I watched it for myself. And he said, if you watch the Texas film and the South Florida film, it is two totally different defensive approaches. He said, however, you got to remember that Alex Golesh, the South Florida coach, came from Tennessee, and he's running the Heupel system. And he said, that system forces you to play differently. He said, if it's Kevin Steele calling it, if it's anybody, you're going to play it differently no matter what, just because of that system. You can't do your normal stuff. He's like, so if you watch the two films, absolutely it's a different approach defensively, and any experienced coach could see that. But there is a reason why if you know the whole story. And the whole story is you're playing an offensive system that forces you to change things like that. And he said, so I could see it. Now, let me just say this. Lane Kiffin is not the only person that has been saying this, that T-Rob might be calling the defensive signals now for Alabama. But I also would say if you're just basing it on the fact that he's on the sidelines, he's looking down, he's calling things in, Kevin still is in the booth. So he's going to have to relay it to someone who then relays it into the players. So I don't know that you can just base it on that. But I did think it was interesting that a football mind like Jeff said, watching the game, yeah, there was a different defensive approach that you could say somebody else is calling this defense, unless you look at it globally and realize it's because of the offense they're facing.
Obviously, Lane, regardless of who's calling the defense and all that stuff, Lane is very clearly trying to stir up something inside that building. He implied that, hey, we talk to people inside that building. We get things, right? I mean, that is designed to irritate, to agitate, in my opinion. I think you share that. I thought the Monday tweet was more interesting than the Sunday comment because whatever, right? It's a defense. It's Alabama's defense. It's on film. You generally know. The Monday tweet, the Taylor Swift castle crumbling thing, how'd that go over in Alabama? I'm sure it was for you guys. It was like, hello, programming. But, I mean, how did that go over in that state? How do you guess that went over inside the building in Tuscaloosa?
Oh, because I think the castle crumbling thing. Well, let me answer the first question first. The first question, you got a pretty heavy eye roll from Alabama fans. But now let me just tell you this: Alabama fans, whether they want to admit it or not, are in a pretty big state of concern right now over the state of this football program, which sounds insane to say about Alabama, but it's true. Of the current state of this football program, with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss coming to town, this is a very losable game. Nick Saban has never at Alabama lost 2 games in the month of September. And Alabama fans know losing this game will knock you out of the national championship hunt. They also know this was an eminently losable game in Oxford last year. I've heard you say it many times. You are not alone in saying it. If there weren't a guy named Bryce Young playing quarterback at Alabama, they lose this game last year.
For sure.
So, yeah, all those things are true, right? Alabama fans know all those things. So there is a heightened level of panic that we've never really had. Had Alabama beaten Texas, it wouldn't exist. Well, had they beaten Texas, they wouldn't have done what they did in looking for a quarterback at South Florida last week. Alabama fans would be eminently confident about this game. The point spread will probably be more 14 than it is 7. And Alabama fans would be like, same old Lane Kiffin, same old Ole Miss, not a problem. But this is a fan base that's at a heightened level of panic right now. As far as in the facility with the castle crumbling, I think if you pair that up, because to me, like you said, Nick Saban actually came out and addressed the old, is Kevin still calling defense or not, which I found interesting that he immediately addressed it in his Monday press conference, didn't credit Lane, but just said, you've all heard the rumors and things like that. Excuse me, the castle crumbling thing paired up with him doubling down now, Lane doubling down and saying, word came from inside the facility. let me tell you, if you want to get under Nick Saban's skin quicker than anything, you tell him people inside your building are telling me what's going on. Um, it's been a couple of years back. There were some reports about some things that had gone on inside the program. Nothing salacious, but just like personnel moves and things like that. And Nick Saban in a press conference told the media, "Look, I understand y'all have a job to do, but y'all are going to get somebody fired." Basically saying, if y'all are talking to sources inside the building and I find out who they are, I'm firing them. I mean, that is as tight a ship. It's at times really difficult to get any information out of that building. So that was a calculated shot. Lane Kiffin worked there. He knew how serious Nick Saban took that. So when you say that and you come back and say the kingdom is crumbling, you pair those two together, that's about as big a shot as you could take at Nick Saban right now.
All right, you say this is a losable game. I think it's a losable game for Alabama. I think it's a winnable game, obviously. They're favored. Most people are picking them to win. But I do think they're vulnerable. You've watched Alabama. You get paid to watch Alabama. You have to watch Alabama. You got to talk about Alabama. You've watched probably every snap they've played so far this season. What are they?
That is a great question. They are a team that last week, for better or worse, identified their quarterback. I can at least say that. I mean, it's going to be Jalen Milroe. I think Nick Saban, in a lot of ways, that score is going to get people's attention. But in a lot of ways, Nick Saban, I think, used that game as a scrimmage. He would never in a million years admit that. But I think, he realized you could line up and play as base as you want and beat South Florida. So let's see what we got at quarterback. It's our last chance to do it, because conference play starts and the schedule only gets more difficult. So see what you got at quarterback. See if you've got a guy that can be better than Jalen Milroe. They went Tyler Buckner. Question answered. Nowhere close to Jalen Milroe. Ty Simpson showed a little promise, but I think if you're being honest about it, you're like, that needs some development there. And here's the thing about Milroe. So Milroe, if Tommy Rees, which he did not do against Texas, will use his legs, some designed runs for Milroe against Ole Miss in the future schedule, it's going to do a lot of things. Number one, it's going to keep safeties from being able just to step back and take away the deep ball. That's Milroe's best pass. The more he runs, the more safeties have to come to the line, so it opens up the deep ball. It's going to slow down the pass rush, which Alabama is bad at dealing with. It's going to help your traditional run game. Jason McClellan and Roydell Williams have shown great promise, and Alabama blocks better for the run than they do for the pass. And overall, it masks probably the biggest weakness on offense right now, which is they cannot protect the passer. So just some designed runs help all those things. And that was some of the criticism Tommy Rees has been getting from the Texas game. There were no screens or anything to slow down a pass rush that you couldn't block, and you just didn't have any designed runs for Milroe. Can they work some of that in? If they do, I think they've got a workable offense. I don't think the defense has been all that bad. I mean, the defense, you got to remember that Texas game, Neal, was 16-13 going to the fourth quarter, and that defense had been asked to make some big holds, and they did. They finally broke in that fourth quarter, but they were out on the field so much just because Alabama couldn't really move the football for the first three quarters.
Lots of high leverage snaps for that defense too, where the game's on
no doubt
play after play. That's draining.
Yeah, you had no offensive support. Now, last week, the quarterback for South Florida had a lot of rush yards. They didn't really run the ball traditionally against Alabama. That was just a weird game last week. I don't even know what to make of that game. But I would say overall, Alabama's a solid defensive team, and they've got potential to have a workable offense if they take advantage of what Milroe does best, and that's run the football.
I've been saying that for Ole Miss, it feels crazy to say this early in the season. This feels like one of those games that it's either a huge win or it's a huge loss. I can't spin it another way. Maybe I might be dead wrong. Okay, maybe we'll look back at the end of the year and be like, no, man, that was a really bad take on your part. Certainly possible. Won't be the first one. Probably won't be the last one. But it feels like for Ole Miss, a win is this hurdle leaped. It is, you got to this. You're trying to get to the mountaintop, and there's this one of the mountains in the range that you're on. You just always keep sliding down it. You never can get past it. This is a big spot for them that allows them to look at the mountaintop and go, well, okay, we got a shot now to get to it. And a loss is just debilitating, because if you lose to this Alabama team after all the bluster, it's, hey, maybe we just can't do this. Maybe this can't be done. Maybe we need to stop talking so much. A lot of that stuff, right? And then LSU's right around the corner, and it could spiral a little. It just feels feels huge from your perspective, a state over, watching Ole Miss less closely than I do. Do you buy that at all, or am I shooting?
Well, I mean, I would just approach it from, all right, Ole Miss has never been to Atlanta. So if you're going to make it to Atlanta in the last year of the West, what are you going to have to do? Well, you're definitely going to have to beat either Alabama or LSU. You really need to beat both of them, right?
Yeah.
Now, you can remove a lot of doubt by beating both of them. And
because
now you've jumped the hurdle.
To Georgia at the end of the year. See, if you beat both of them, the trip to Georgia it's a free shot. It doesn't hurt you.
That's right. That's an East game. Yeah. Now, Texas A&M could factor into this. We'll see about them. But you're probably going to have to beat both of them. And then so you stop and look at that and you say, okay, well, where do I have to go? Do I have to go to Bryant-Denny or Tiger Stadium? You got to go to Bryant-Denny. So if you can get this one, then at least for whatever it's worth, I'm right about that, right? LSU comes to Oxford for the Magnolia Bowl. Yeah.
Next week.
Yeah, next week. So you get them back-to-back weeks. May as well do that, right? May as well just go ahead and knock out both if you can. And at least you get LSU coming to your place. Now, 3 weeks ago, you felt a lot better about it than you did after Saturday when they just dominated State. But I'm just saying, this would be winning the road game, getting one of the two you got to beat out of the way, and you beat the one on the road. How they would handle that, I don't know. I mean, we've never really seen that under Lane Kiffin. It would seem like it would take a lot to get that team back down for LSU. But until you vanquish one of those two or both of those, your chances of going to Atlanta are very, very low. So I don't disagree with that assessment of it. From the outside looking in, I would say the one that concerns me the most is the one I got to play on the road. Is LSU probably better than Alabama right now? Yeah, but I get them at home.
Why do you think Lane Kiffin is so geeked up for this game every year? Because it's not just the, hey, I used to coach there thing. Because, I mean, there's a lot of guys at this point that used to coach at Alabama that they worked for Saban. They respect Saban, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we've done it so many times that I don't even pay attention to the Lane Kiffin questions about Nick Saban anymore. We've been down this road. But he just can't. This week comes, and it's not like every other week. He does this pro mindset thing. That's their deal. Pro mindset. Why'd you bring in Spencer Sanders? Because my job is to make every room competitive. Every room competitive. That's what they do in the NFL. It's pro mindset. Well, in the NFL, you don't really see teams go, hey, this game in September is the end-all, be-all. It's this monumental thing. We do all these jabs, and he does it. Why do you think that is? Here's my theory. My theory is that Lane Kiffin doesn't like Nick Saban as much as Lane Kiffin pretends to like Nick Saban, that he respects him, but I think that personally he really wants to get him, and he knows he's running out of chances.
Well, it did not end well between he and Saban, so there would be reason that you could think he doesn't like Saban. I think there are a couple of things. I think, number one, he's in that fraternity of coaches, and a lot of those coaches have started beating Nick Saban. Kirby Smart has now done it. Jimbo Fisher has now done it.
Steve
Sarkisian has now done it. Absolutely. And now you're the one guy in that group that used to send the text about, Nick, we can't beat Nick. And now all of a sudden, all your other peer groups done it, and you haven't yet. So I do think that plays into it. I think part of it, too, is to use an old dating analogy. Like, you always want your ex-girlfriend to think you're winning the breakup, right? And especially if you could go to Tuscaloosa win this game, but anytime you beat them, there are a lot of ex-girlfriends. Well, boy, that is a bad analogy here. There are, let me say it this way, there are figuratively, a lot of ex-girlfriends in Tuscaloosa for Lane that a win here, and you look at that and say, see what I'm doing now? You could have kept me. You could maybe have me when coach retires. But you see what I'm doing now, right? I'm winning the breakup. I'm living right. I'm living good. My program's on an upward trajectory. Yours, what do you got now? And I do think there's probably, while he plays nice and says nice things about Nick Saban, I do think there's probably, he probably didn't like the way all of that ended when Nick Saban basically told him, I know I've got a national championship game coming up. I don't want you to be part of it. I'll hand the plays off to Steve Sarkisian and let him call the game. You're that interchangeable. You just go coach FAU. And I'm sure that hurt. And I think there's probably some bad feelings there.
All right, you mentioned Saban retiring as we start to wrap up. I don't know how much you guys talked about it. Probably a good bit. I've talked about it a little bit. Glenn Guilbeau had a story over the weekend. I've known Glenn for a long, long time. I think he's a good reporter. He covered Saban at LSU. He's very connected, kind of in SEC circles. He's with Outkick now. And I think because he's with Outkick, a lot of the mainstream media people didn't pick the story up because they don't like Clay. That's right. That's the reality.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that phenomenon. Yes, Clay
Yes,
comes on our show every week. Yeah,
Clay's on your show every week.
that's right.
A lot of mainstream media people they view Clay as a grifter and they don't like him because he's
Yeah,
conservative and he all that
right.
stuff, and so they're angry with him, and it's just inside. There's some inside baseball for you.
Yep,
So they
yep,
didn't
yep.
pick up on this story, but I did. I looked at it and went, "Huh, interesting," because Glenn Guilbeau quotes someone who he claims very close to Nick Saban. I know Glenn knows people who are close to Saban who said, "Hey, it may not be this year, but if it's not this year, it's next year." Saban is setting himself up to walk away. I know Nick has denied that, but you're around it. He does seem a little different. It does seem like
Yeah.
the dynasty is coming to an end. It's been one hell of a run, right? I mean, no matter how it ends, it's been amazing what he's done. Did that story catch your attention?
It did a little bit. Now you got to remember, you hear that a lot around here, though. The speculation. I can remember it as far back as 2013 when Gus Malzahn in his first year beat Alabama. That was the kick six game, and Alabama struggled with that offense. They had struggled with it when Cam Newton was the quarterback in 10. They struggled with it when Nick Marshall was the quarterback in 13, when Gus was actually the head coach, not just the coordinator. And I remember that was, when Colin Cowherd infamously said, Nick Saban has been passed. The SEC is Gus Malzahn football, not Nick Saban football anymore. That was a horribly bad opinion. Nick Saban has won multiple championships since then. So that was just wrong. But that was, from that point on, I remember the 2014 game. Ole Miss fans will remember this well. When Ole Miss is beating Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium in the third game of the year. And Dan Wolken of USA Today, basically, Alabama comes back on the field and he says something along the lines of, it feels like the game and much more than that is in the balance on this drive. Basically insinuating Nick Saban's, future is on the line here. And, I think he even wrote the retirement column after the game. And
Wrong.
so, yeah, well, it was Dan. So I mean, it has been time and time and time again, to the point that those things do just start to wash over you. I will say this: Glenn Guilbeau does know Nick Saban very, very well. Like, I can remember when LSU first came to Tuscaloosa after Saban took the job in 2007. I was at the weekly press conference, and when the press conference was over, there were a handful. Glenn was one of them. A handful of LSU beat writers that had come to that press conference. And normally Nick Saban finishes, he's kind of up on a stage area. He walks off the stage, goes out the side door back to his office. That day he came off the stage and he walked up to every one of those LSU guys that shook their hands and, told them it was good to see him. It'd been a minute. Just kind of a rare human moment with the media there. But they're only changing of Nick Saban. This is kind of interesting, Neal, that you brought this up. I was, for whatever reason, I've gotten sucked into TikTok. I guess it's because I had a teenager in the house before she went off to college. I don't know. I got a short attention span. TikTok's great for me. I know I'm a Chinese plant now, but TikTok, it's quick videos that I can just watch and keep scrolling through because I got a short attention span. But there was one that was like a supercut of Nick Saban's meltdowns, like just blasting players on the sidelines and stuff like that. And I watched it and I remember them all, but then I was like, yeah, I hadn't seen that Nick Saban in a while.
Yeah.
Like, that guy has disappeared. The guy that would just, headphones off and just red faced, just spitting nails, man. That guy has disappeared. He doesn't really exist anymore in the game. And I don't know if it's age. Some people have said it's that he's become a grandfather. Some people have insinuated that with the transfer portal as active as it can be, that he has realized, I got to coddle players a little bit more because I can't just jump their ass every time they do something wrong and they'll be in the portal. So there could be a lot of reasons why, but that guy, and former players have said this. It's not just me saying it because some stupid TikTok video. We've had former players that on this show have said, I didn't play for that guy.
Yeah.
I love him. He's still the greatest there's ever been, but that guy didn't exist when I played at Alabama.
All right, last thing. I don't know if you've made a pick or whatever. By the time this shows up, you may have already done it. What's your kind of gut feeling as to what's going to happen Saturday in Tuscaloosa?
This is such a hard Alabama team to figure out. I have watched a lot of Ole Miss. I did not watch week one, but I watched all of the Tulane game, and I watched just about all of the Georgia Tech game as well. And if I'm Ole Miss, the thing that worries me is I'm asking a lot of Jackson Dart in the run game. And that has actually been a way to beat Alabama. They play so much man coverage that quarterbacks that get flushed, if they can get past that initial rush, there's often a lot of running room there. So that is something of great concern to Alabama in this game. But Ole Miss's inability to run the ball effectively in the traditional run game with Quinshon Judkins has been puzzling to me. I expected that to just pick up right where it left off last year. So I think you got Lane Kiffin, who's having to call plays without his fastball just a little bit in the run game, though Lane is very, very good at calling plays. And I think this Alabama defense is better maybe than it has looked. So normally I would say Alabama big in this game. I think Vegas has it about right. I think Alabama wins this by somewhere 3 to 7 points. I think it's going to be a tight game, kind of like last year. Alabama squeaks out a win. If Ole Miss wins this game, it does not surprise me. But I am not at all confident in what I just said to you in this pick, because this has been an impossible Alabama team so far to figure out.
As always, my friend, thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always great, Neal. Thank you very much, man.
Tony Tsoukalis, the managing editor of TideIllustrated.com, part of the Rivals Network, kind enough to spend some time with us here on this extra edition, previewing Ole Miss at Alabama on Saturday. Tony, the good news is whenever these two teams get together, especially with Lane Kiffin at the head coaching position at Ole Miss, there's no lack of storylines. I mean, there's no lack of drama. They, by God, give it to us in spades, and here we have it again this year. They don't even know where to start. I'll start here.
Popcorn ready.
Yeah, get your popcorn ready. I'll start here. You cover Alabama. You've been around Saban and all those guys. How do you think all of this social media stuff has played in Tuscaloosa, in that building this week as they get ready for the Rebels?
Yeah, I think Lane Kiffin's doing everything you can to just make Nick Saban's week as hard as it could be, and I think that's just part of it. Whether or not I don't know how serious he wants to be with all this, or if he really thinks he's going to impact the way Nick Saban. But he's been a pain in Nick Saban's butt, and that's mission accomplished for Lane. Bringing this up on a Sunday before Nick can kind of address things, adding an extra wrinkle when Nick Saban has to deal with his quarterback competition. I just think this is the kind of mastery that Lane Kiffin can do, that it just adds up and it creates enough little distractions that I don't think any of what happened this week is a big deal, or it's going to be really make things tougher on Nick Saban or really cause too much drama. But it's just another pain that he has to deal with during a time when he's already kind of down in his program, and it's just Lane can kind of throw up his hands like, oh, I wasn't doing anything. And it's just so brilliant the way he kind of just plays this situation like a fiddle,
All right, so let's dive into both of the things, because the first is that he said that it's not Kevin Steele's defense right now. It looks like Travaris Robinson is calling the plays. I will tell you that I've talked to other people in Alabama in media who think that's true. Nick Saban denied it. He said, hey, it's Kevin Steele's defense. He's the defensive coordinator. Nothing's changed. Hey, we changed the machinations on some things. Lane comes back with, hey, look, I was like you said. I mean, you asked, which is, of course, it was planted question. You asked, and I answered, and we talked to people, which I thought it was Lane Kiffin's way of saying, hey, there's a mole inside your building. That's something else for you to worry about right now, Nick. You got somebody talking to us. Pete used to work there. He still knows people. I know people. Everybody knows people. We all know people. People are talking, and they're saying that it's Travaris Robinson's defense. So twofold question. One, do you put any validity into that claim? And two, does it even matter? It's still Nick Saban's defense, right?
Yeah, I know. I've heard some rumors too that it could be T-Rob calling the defense. I tend to think that we're early on in this, that I'm still a little bit skeptical. I mean, but then again, with the way that Kevin Steele was hired, and he wasn't necessarily the first choice so I mean, maybe it would make sense that if things went wrong, they would switch to another person. They've kind of done that before. I mean, Tosh Lapoy was the defensive coordinator, and Pete Golding was the one calling it, during that first season with Pete. So it's not necessarily out of Alabama's playbook for that to happen. I wouldn't be shocked. I still am a little bit skeptical, and I've heard some rumors too, but I don't know. But to answer your second question, I don't think it really matters. It still is Nick Saban's defense. But what I was telling you about before is it just adds another just thorn in Nick Saban's side. Whether it's he has to worry about a mole, or whether or not he's just going to have to, it's a little bit embarrassing. He might have to deal with some drama with Kevin, and it kind of discredits the job Kevin's done if he really is doing it. So I just think it just adds a little bit of drama, just a little bit, anything he can do to kind of make Nick's week a little bit harder. And I don't think it's going to make it much harder. I don't think this is a major problem for Alabama, but it's just kind of a great little jibe, that he can just kind of do, that really takes no effort from Lane, and it just makes Nick Saban's world a little bit harder.
All right, question 2, and this is the bigger one, because I agree. The other thing's kind of like whatever. I mean, they're gonna people calling defenses. They're gonna have a plan. They know what they're gonna do. Both of them are gonna have input on it and all that stuff. Lane Kiffin tweets on Tuesday morning a Taylor Swift song. Now, it's possible that Lane just was having a Taylor Swift moment. I don't believe that. It's Castles Crumbling by Taylor Swift. The lyrics to that song are something else. Is the castle crumbling? Are we being too premature on this? I mean, this is, if you are to believe what he's intimating, it is that, hey, the dynasty is almost over. It's crumbling. You had a hell of a run, but it's coming to an end. Do you put any stock in that? You're around it every day.
So I've been asked this question a bunch over the last few years. Like, what is the dynasty is not just going to die, and what does that even mean? Like, it's not like somebody's going to take over Alabama and won't be able to compete at football anymore, and they won't be able to win anymore. I had this conversation with someone and said, like, what if Clemson was to win a championship this year? Does that mean that we like extend their dynasty from before over on into this one? Like, no, so and to that regard, I think the dynasty's already dying, and it's been dying. It's been on a downhill. I mean, Alabama used to, be a different. They're not the same Alabama they were 5 years ago or 7 years ago. I mean, I don't think that it's dead in the fact that I still think Alabama's a contender, even with as bad as this season has started. I mean, you look across college football. If Alabama can get some momentum with a win against Ole Miss, and I think the SEC is kind of down this year, you could make a really strong case that they could get back to the playoff. I personally right now don't see that happening, but I think you could make a case. So yeah, but I do think that the dynasty is dying. I don't think it's dead unless, what do you want to call dead? But Alabama's struggling on the road against USF. Look how many close games Alabama had. It used to be like they won every single game by like 20 or 25 points, and then they'd get caught every now and then. Now it's like even the games that they're winning. Look at the game against Ole Miss last year. I mean, no one talks about that one, but they almost lost that. I mean, so yeah, it's a totally different kind of team, or they're having to scrape by on situations where they wouldn't have had to scrape by in the past. So they're not as dominant anymore. There's also I'm not sure we're going to get anybody as dominant as Alabama was in college football, with the way that people can rebuild in the transfer portal, where you can address needs, the constant changing of rosters. I mean, look at the Georgia team last year. I didn't think that was necessarily all that great of a team, but to Kirby Smart's credit, it was able to get do what it had to do, and it got the breaks it needed, and went undefeated. But I don't know if we have these teams that just roll over people anymore in college football.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't even. I'm with you. I had that conversation with someone. I'm like, well, how do you define the death of the dynasty? I mean, how does that work? I mean, they don't win it every year anymore? Because that's over. No one's ever going to do that again. No, the run that Saban had for 15 years, where he won 6 titles, 7 titles. I lose track. Literally, that's how good they're so good that you lose track of how many titles. We all know Georgia's won 2, right? No, even think about it. Georgia's won 2. How many Saban win? You're like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8.
6 with Alabama, 7 with LSU.
Yeah,
Or 7.
yeah. So I mean, the run that he had, where he dominated the sport for a decade and a half, I don't think anyone's ever going to do that again, Saban included. It's just impossible. I think in today's NIL and pay for play and all the stuff that's going on with the transfer portal and all of those things, I don't think one program can just go win 40% of the titles in a decade and a half. I just don't think that's realistic. So yeah, that part's dead. But here's maybe the better question: how vulnerable is Alabama right now compared to maybe what it was a year ago?
Oh, 100% completely vulnerable. I mean, they're a beatable team. I don't necessarily right now see much of a difference in Alabama than I do a lot of SEC teams. Like really right now between Alabama and Ole Miss, they're kind of until Alabama can figure out its offense, I think they're kind of the same team in terms of, across the board who I would pick to win a game. I think you can pick Ole Miss to win a lot of games. You can pick Alabama to win a lot of games, but you're not, they're not untouchable. And I think that that's pretty, I'm not trying to even diss Ole Miss here. It's just they're on the brain since
Yeah,
this
sure.
week. I think that, that's kind of where Alabama is. And that's kind of a diss to Alabama from what it's been like. I don't think they normally compare themselves with the likes of, Ole Miss or the likes of, maybe Texas A&M, but that's kind of, if you take those kind of contenders in the SEC, but not necessarily contenders in the national scheme of things, you could almost make the point that Alabama's there right now. Now, I think that Alabama can develop back into a national contender, but they certainly don't look like one right now. They look like a team that can contend for an SEC title. It's probably, probably not going to win one, but could contend. They're in it, but I don't think they're necessarily a team that you circle anymore. At least over the first 3 weeks, as this team really has a legit shot at the national title. It's just not playing that way. I think it could get that way. I think I think they could build themselves back, and I think that they have a lot of talent on this roster, but the way that they're playing, they're very vulnerable. They don't play like Alabama, or I guess like Alabama anymore. So.
They've had such a run of quarterbacks, right? Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa and Mac Jones and Bryce Young, and now they're trying to figure it out at quarterback these first few weeks. It's Jalen Milroe on Saturday; he'll be the starter according to Nick Saban. Are you surprised at all that it's Milroe? And what does Ole Miss encounter going up against Milroe?
It's just so weird that I was weirded out that if you were going to play Milroe the whole game against Texas, why didn't you play him at all against South Florida? And then if you're not going to play him at all against South Florida, why are you suddenly making him your starter? I mean, Nick Saban doesn't name starting quarterbacks. He's never really done that. So for him to come out and name Jalen Milroe the starting quarterback after not playing him the week before, it's just so bizarre. So in that terms, I'm surprised. If you really looked at the way
you for a second. Let me interrupt you for a second. Is it possible? And I'm just asking because these rumors are out there, and I know you can't confirm or deny rumors when you don't know yourself. But there was talk about locker room dissension about who the quarterback was. That Milroe was sort of the player's choice. They looked at Buckner. They looked at Simpson. Maybe Milroe didn't handle that very well, and maybe he was in the doghouse a little bit in Tampa. But maybe this was to not appease the players, but to get the players back confident and going and fired up. Is it even conceivable that that's the case?
I think, yeah, in terms of naming him the starting quarterback, yeah, I think you almost have to do that, to a certain extent to build back his confidence, because it is so weird that you have a starting quarterback that you just decided not to play in a game that was close. It'd be one thing if they, didn't play Jalen Milroe and, Ty Simpson or Tyler Buckner had a good game against South Florida and they were just overmatched, and then he just went back to Jalen Milroe. But they needed Jalen Milroe at times against South Florida, and they could have really used him, and they didn't use him. So that was just, like I said, puzzling. It could. There is some rumors about like that it could be, I don't want to say like a suspension, but that could have been like the reason why he didn't play. He more so got bumped because of maybe the way he handled the week of practice, whether it be through something he said or the way he acted. Maybe he pouted during the week. I don't have those answers, but those are ideas and theories and rumors that have been kicked around. And to be fair, they kind of, I could see where they would make sense. We've seen narratives like that in college football. Obviously, as close as the game was, it's a 2-touchdown game. I think Nick Saban knew he didn't necessarily he could get by with very little and still beat South Florida. It's not a good team. So I don't know, and I think that maybe he needed to kind of, like you said, spruce things back up, give Milroe the confidence he needs heading into a matchup, give the players the guy. The thing that puzzles me though is why not do that on a Wednesday? Why not do that internally? You basically talk about like the gamemanship of this week. You gave you gave Lane Kiffin an advantage that you didn't necessarily need to give him. Now, whether or not Lane Kiffin, maybe he does have a mole in the system, and maybe he already knew it was going to be Milroe. But still, I thought it was a kind of a weird move to name a starting quarterback on a Monday when you could have just kept that internal.
He's obviously a really good runner. Can he throw it enough to keep defenses honest?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's leads the SEC in deep passing, in terms of, but it's that intermediate game that he has to work on. He didn't look good against Texas with intermediate passing. He has a tendency when he gets kind of pressured or nervous to stare down receivers, and those can result in big plays. And if you can bait him into that, you can get a turnover off of him. So the intermediate passing is a concern, but it's not like he can't pass the ball. I mean, they've hit some big plays. I think if you roll them out and have those big options and really, I think what it's going to have to be is they're going to have to use him the right way. They can't use him the way that they've been using other quarterbacks. I think you need to have designed runs. I think you need to have short screen passes. Bring the defense in and then hit him deep. Because the one thing that that he can do is hit him deep. That's the one thing. It's kind of weird. Last year he struggled with that, but this year that's the thing he's done, excellently. So if I was, if you put me in charge of the offensive coordinator for a second, I'd have a lot of screens. I'd have inside, runs with him, enforce, Ole Miss to crowd the box, and then all of a sudden roll out, have him buy some time, and hit, somebody like Isaiah Bond for a 50-yarder, and then you have to spread the defense back out, and it just opens up, plays for the other things. But I don't necessarily think you have to treat him like this pro style quarterback. I think if you were to run the ball 15 times with Jalen Milroe every week, that might be the way to use him, and I don't think that's insulting him. I think as a college quarterback, he can be a really dangerous college quarterback. But if you try to play him the way that you're doing, the way that you played Mac Jones or the way that you played Bryce Young, it's just not going to work because he's not there yet. Those two passers could throw the ball at the intermediate game, and right now at the moment, Jalen can't do that. I think you're going to have to be a lot more creative. They need someone per se like a Gus Malzahn who's going to be able to just do some. They need a funky offense to kind of play to his strengths, and is Tommy Rees going to do that? I think that's going to define his success in year one.
Yeah, and you wonder, can you put all that together in a week or two? How much of that can you effectively install? How much of that is already there? How much of that is just that? I mean, how much can you get, assuming that it's not in the package yet? How much of that can you put in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to get ready for a Saturday game?
Well, and I was talking with little guys, a little bit of an exclusive here, but I was talking with some sources, and there's been some frustration, from some on the Alabama side that there are plays and things that they have in the offense that they haven't used yet. And there was some frustration on some of the things that you would necessarily think would help Jalen that weren't necessarily used during the Texas game, and I think so. Maybe Alabama hasn't shown its full offense, and I don't know why they were saving it. I don't know if that was just situationally in the Texas game, things went a way that they weren't expecting and they didn't do it. But there are supposedly some short passes, some running, some design runs from Jalen that we haven't seen yet. So we'll see. I mean, that's just what I've been told. But that is an interesting thing moving forward, and maybe I don't know personally why you wouldn't do those in the Texas game, but maybe the game played out in a way that they didn't use those, and so that could be something. I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama throws a few of those out against Ole Miss.
We talked about the defense at the beginning, more of a personnel question, and that doesn't really require a lot here. I'm just curious. when I think about Alabama and the dynasty over the last 15 years, I think about just the impactful defensive players they've had. Just one after the other, guys that were dominant that you had to be aware of. Most recently, it was Will Anderson. You had to know where he was. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. And so there would be plays where he wasn't involved in the play, and yet you knew because he was on the field, he was a big reason that play unfolded the way that it did. They still got a lot of talent on defense. You see it, but is there a talent fall off from the last few years, or is this a defense that at the end of the year you still expect them to be dominant?
Well, it's a defense I think that looks pretty good. It's hard to find like someone like Will Anderson because I think he's been the best player in college football the past like 2 years, at least the most talented.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, it's tough. I think that there's players that will be game changing players. I think Deontay Lawson, the inside linebacker, is exactly what they need at that position for this defense. I think Dallas Turner. He's been kind of streaky, but he had a good game against South Florida. We'll see if he can carry that over. Yeah, I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is one of the best cornerbacks in the league. So you've got some, I think, potential first rounders there. And I think you really saw it's not the defense. It's not the reason why they've really been struggling. I know that they gave up those big plays against Texas, but we were talking a little bit before the show. It's kind of like a pitcher where, if you have to pitch with the bases loaded a bunch of times, you come in the next inning and, your arm's already worn. It doesn't matter if you had a big pitch count or not. Those situations where you have to come in and you're playing with a short field or you have to make these crucial stops, those wear on a defense regardless of how many plays they're out there. And I think at Texas, they were just worn down. Maybe it was mentally, maybe it was physically, but they were, I think that, and just how fast Texas was moving too. So I think
it's a great analogy. There's a big difference between pitching, with a 11-1 lead in the seventh inning where you're just like, hey, here's fastball, go for it. If you hit a home run, you hit a home run. I'll still be up 9. We're just gonna go pitch here, as opposed to, hey, coming in, or you're working the 6th inning with a 1-run lead and the bases are loaded with 1 out and every pitch is super high leverage and you get through it, but you used a lot of energy and then you come back out and you walk a guy and you're in trouble all of a sudden again. There's a big difference in that, and I think that applies to defense. I don't think we think about it, but when you're playing defense where every single play could cost you the game, that's mentally taxing as opposed to playing up 31-0, where if you have a busted assignment, you're going to get yelled at, but it's not costing you the game.
And basically, Alabama's the pitcher that knows it's right now with a team full of 250 hitters. So he knows he's not going to get much run support. And so I think that the defense, it does put a lot of pressure on him. And I think once the cracks started to show against Texas, then things unraveled just because of the pressure of that. That's one thing, though, that I think Ole Miss can do in this game is move fast and just be relentless on offense. And if you get stopped, make some plays on defense. And I kind of think it was the same sense of like Alabama was so good on that crazy game in 2020 that it just seemed like they were going to have the ball last and, they were going to win. Well, if Ole Miss can just keep on, stopping Alabama's defense, kind of the reverse of that game, stopping Alabama's offense, I think that its offense, I'm struggling through this one, but the Ole Miss offense will be good enough to eventually break Alabama's defense if it can continuously frustrate Alabama on offense. Because I just think that they'll have the same thing where the pressure of this game being close, with how fast Ole Miss runs on offense, I think eventually they'll catch Alabama sleeping on a play or two, and they'll be able to take advantage of that. And if Alabama's still a mess when they have the ball, I think that they can basically Ole Miss can replicate what Texas did.
All right. Well, as we start to wrap up, we'll go there. I know you think Ole Miss can win. If I told you Ole Miss won, the football gods came down and said, hey, Tony, Ole Miss wins the game, how would you guess it sort of played out?
It's got to be through a turnover. I think, it'd have to be through things working the right way. I think that, you saw a lot of crafty things that, Texas did with, late tight end releases and screens and just different ways to catch Alabama. Especially when they're moving fast, I think you can kind of slip some of those receivers, undetected, maybe get a tight end that everyone thinks is a blocker, move him in as a pass catcher. I think Lane Kiffin's going to be able to see what worked in those situations and kind of hit Alabama there. But I really think it would come down to, if it's a close game, a turnover, like we saw in the Texas game, where, if Jalen Milroe is going to make a turnover in the fourth quarter, and then that, Ole Miss can either turn that into points on defense or come back out and kind of make it a 2-possession game. I don't know if they'll look back at that point. So, like, if Ole Miss is up by 3 and then Jalen Milroe throws a pick and then Ole Miss capitalizes with a touchdown and they go up by 10, Alabama shouldn't be out of the game. But I feel like this Alabama offense, might at that point panic or fold or whatever you want to say. And that could be, what we're talking about as an upset.
So last thing, what do you expect Saturday?
So the crazy thing is, when I thought Alabama was this big bad Alabama that was going to bully everyone, I had predicted that they were going to beat Texas and then just blow the doors off of USF and then come back home and be maybe overconfident against Ole Miss. This was actually the sleeper game. I had them losing one game all season, and it was actually Ole Miss. Not because I thought the same, for different reasons. I think I'm going to pick Ole Miss here, but for different reasons than I originally did. I think at one point I thought this was just a game that I thought Lane Kiffin could maybe catch Nick Saban overconfident and kind of bring Alabama back down to earth. But now I think it's a game where they can kind of kick them when they're down. And this is the right time to play Alabama, and I think normally you would say, oh, this is a terrible time to play Alabama because they're riled up. But I don't think Alabama has the ammunition at the moment to it's not one of those things where they're a sleeping giant and it's them against the world. I don't know if they have that punch left in them. If this is they're bleeding, if they're cut, if this is a boxing match. And I think that this is the time to hit them, because I think that they can maybe recover later on in the season. But, you could really, they're stumbling right now, and Ole Miss could really go for a knockout blow.
Tony, as always, man, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, anytime.
Former Alabama linebacker Cory Reamer, now with the Crimson Tide Sports Network, kind enough to join us a little bit as we talk about Ole Miss getting ready to head to Alabama for Saturday's showdown. Cory, first of all, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Neal. Looking forward to should be an interesting game with so far how this season started. And Lane Kiffin is being Lane Kiffin and keeping it exciting during the week.
He does that. That's for sure. Let me start here. I'm curious because if I've got the timeline of your career correctly, you signed with Mike Shula and ended up playing for Nick Saban for quite a bit of time, correct?
Yeah, so I had 2 years with Shula. He recruited me out of high school, signed with him in 05 and had 05 and 06 with Shula. And then Saban comes in for 2007 season. And I had redshirted my sophomore year for a knee injury. And so then I had 3 years left when Saban got there and finished in 09 with a pretty good run. National championship on the way out wasn't bad.
No, that's not a bad way to finish at all. What was it like? Kind of a twofold question here, because I'm curious to get your perspective, because you'll be able to really, I would think, have some thoughts here. What was it like to play for that Nick Saban? Obviously, he's the same human being, but he's older now, and I hear people say, Ryan Brown was telling me today, there's a lot of people, former Alabama players, that are like, hey, the guy that you see on the field now, I didn't play for that guy. I played for a different guy. What was it like to play for that Saban? And then how have you seen him change over the last 15, 16 years?
Yeah, I think even when he first got hired, the mindset that he had coming into that first season was even different from what he was in 2009. He comes into a program that just went 6-7. He's got a job to do of trying to get this team turned around pretty quickly. And the expectations and the style of coaching that we had from Shula to Saban was completely different. And Coach Shula was a phenomenal coach. And especially from an X's and O's standpoint, and the players loved him. But in terms of micromanaging every little thing that a college player does, I'd say Coach Shula had more of like an NFL mindset, where if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do, he's used to being able to cut somebody and move it on. And so when Coach Saban shows up, he's locked into every little detail, all the things that we're doing, the dress code, what we're wearing in the locker rooms, to the practices, to fourth quarter programs. And it's a grind because he's completely overhauling a team at that point. And he's got such a high standard for himself, and he knows what the recipe is for success. And so he commands a lot out of you. And I played for a high school coach that was kind of the same way, Rush Probst at Hoover. I mean, he was just always, he knows how to win ball games, and he knows what it takes to win ball games. And he's not going to let anything slide, because he knows as soon as you give an inch, somebody's going to take a mile, take advantage of it. So, go into 2009, 2007, it probably was not as much of a relationship that you had by 2009 with him, because you'd been with him for a few years. But the standard and all the things that he asked all his players to do really never changed. And I spoke the other night about what's different about college football now. And you've seen how people say that he's got a nicer side, a gentler side. He likes to interact with the players a little bit more. You see him doing all the fun things that are all on social media. And that's just big, in my opinion, is really just because of the change in NIL, transfer portal, recruiting, how much exposure and positive exposure you've got to have as a coach. And especially now with transfer portal, you've got to manage your roster consistently, not just recruiting, the portal and, freshmen in or seniors in high school. And I think it's kind of it's changed. And I think it's an unfortunate thing, because like I said earlier, what he's doing there is really building young men to be successful, down the road. And it seems like, and he might not agree with this at all, but it does seem like this for across college football. He's not able to command or ask the same things from the players as he used to, because he's trying to, I don't know if you want to say manage feelings or personalities. He's always been great at coaching every single individual the way they need to be coached. And it's different for every player. I always respected him for that, because he understood the psychology of coaching each individual, how they respond. Can you yell at this guy? You have to talk to this guy, kind of coddle him a little bit to get the message across. And now it's just like, I don't know if he's afraid of it as much as maybe I perceive it to be that way, but it does seem like it makes it harder for him to create this team concept of holding the team to a standard to be able to have the same success, because you make one guy upset and he could be in the portal the next day. That's my take on it. Might not be accurate, but that's just what it seems like from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think that's the most logical explanation. I don't think it's this guy getting soft or whatever. I don't think that's the case, but I don't. The guy that used to lose his mind on the sideline, that kind of thing, and the hard nosed, I don't know that works with today's kid as much. And I don't, and especially when, you get guys that the moment something goes wrong, they can bolt, they can hop in the portal and go someplace and play.
Yeah. I talked to him at practice before the season started. We went down and watched and got to talk to him a little bit afterwards. And you can tell when you talk to him, when he's not having to coach these guys and he's just having, candid conversations with us on the sideline, you could tell the guy's still as competitive as he ever has been. And he wants so badly for this every single team, every single year, to understand what it takes to be successful at a program that's had, a decade's worth of success, and how we're the standard in college football. But it seems like, I don't know if he's got to pull the reins on himself a little bit, because of all these other factors that are now a part of college football. And I think it's great that players are getting paid. And I think it's great that a player can move to a different school if it's a better opportunity. But what I think it's created is, the fight or flight response. It's all just flight for a lot of these guys now. And Coach Saban understands that, and he's probably trying to manage it as best as he possibly can. And that might mean that he just has to tone back his the outbursts that he typically would have. And you always saw him when the team was playing well and would make mistakes, was really when he would turn up the outbursts, getting upset on the sideline, making those kinds of mistakes. And then if the team was playing poorly, he would have a little bit of a different approach and not have to, but he was still getting guys' faces and light them up. And I think that these kids need that, but he's not able to deliver it just because of the risk factor of what happens if you lose a guy in the middle of the season, or they just go in the tank. They just shut it down and stop really caring and looking forward to the next chapter.
I assume that probably didn't happen to you too many times. You had a pretty good career there at Alabama, but I'm sure at some point you upset Nick Saban. What was the moment like?
So he figured out pretty early that I could be yelled at, and it didn't really phase. You give him that deer in the headlights look. And he told me after I'd graduated, most of the time that I was yelling at you, it wasn't necessarily something that you did. Now, I made plenty of mistakes, definitely in practice. You asked Kirby, Sal Sinceri, Coach Saban. I was definitely deserving of plenty of the chewings that I got. But he always said, I could give a message to somebody by screaming it at you, and I was a part of the problem as well, but he couldn't directly. And that's what I was saying earlier about how he knows how to coach certain guys. And there's a lot of people he knew that could handle that type of coaching of hard nose. I expect this from you, and I'm going to get after you if you make a mistake. And not everybody responded well to it. But, he always said, though, if I'm not yelling at you, you should be nervous. So I always took it as a compliment if he's yelling at me. He knows that I could do better. And he also said, too, a lot of times was, I want you to hear what I'm saying and not how I'm saying it to you. And so I learned early that I'm just getting the message, and it can't phase you because it would ruin your day. It ruins a practice. It ruins a game if you let it eat you alive and you dwell on it. And so that was something that he taught me, though. It was not something I had already learned before he got there. It was kind of, I evolved in learning how to take his messages, just, not worried about the tone that he was delivering them to me.
I remember young Kirby Smart. I bet those were some toe curling ass chewings.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and he was a guy that, he was young and trying. He'd never been a coordinator before, and he's making a name for himself. And he was always that. He was kind of that buffer between you and Coach Saban, because he was the guy that the players loved. He had all this energy, and he was really leading the charge. But then he could turn it on a dime too, and really just get after your ass. And you kind of would take it, it would just kind of take you aback a little bit, because Coach Saban always was that way. And Kirby would be your buddy, and then all of a sudden you're just getting chewed on. So it was always a little bit more unexpected when he would do it. But it's the, and then he's your best friend as soon as it's over with, and he's encouraging you and wanting you to continue to get after it in practice. But yeah, those were some fun days. He's probably a little bit different now too. I mean, it affects everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about this Alabama team. You do post game, you do some pregame stuff. Mm-hmm. You hear the fans a lot. You probably hear the fans more than most of the people. There seems to be, from the outside looking in, and I've obviously talked to some people, almost like a panic around the Alabama fans a little bit, or certainly a concern that, hey, this season's not going to be like the last 15 or 16. To be the first, if Alabama were to lose Saturday, it'd be the first time in Saban's tenure that two losses in September. Is the panic justified, or are people overreacting to Texas in a weird game against USF?
Yeah, I think the USF game is something that you kind of have to just take it for what it was. And it seemed like it was, you don't know what all is going on in the locker room. There's rumors that how Jalen Milroe responded last week during practice. And then Coach Saban talks about both of the guys that played against USF were the ones that had the better weeks of practice. And I think it was an opportunity you had to give those guys, what do we really have with both of these backups? And we just got to give them some live reps. Some people are just better on Saturdays than they are in practice. Now, that's not the way he likes to operate, because he thinks the way you practice during the week is how you show up and perform on Saturdays. But with all that happened in the Texas game with Jalen Milroe, and what this team looks like and what the bread and butter is going to be of this team, or it was expected to be going into the season, was going to be the running game. And a lot of hype around this offensive line and how they're going to be able to blow guys off the line of scrimmage. And the running game is going to carry this team and get us in short yardage situations that are a lot more manageable than third and longs. And the 2 turnovers and the mistakes that were made, I think that it made him have to really reevaluate and see, all right, we got to give Buckner and Ty Simpson opportunities to go out there and prove if they might carry a team. But I think there's also a locker room effect that he's having to manage of which quarterback is the locker room behind. And there's a lot of different dynamics that seem to be in play for this team this year. And it's hard to pinpoint what this is going to look like going forward. there's a lot of reasons for concern because it's not just a quarterback problem. You've got an offensive line that is, and I think they're getting scrutinized the most. And some people say it's not justified, but the expectation was so high for this group coming in. That's why they're really taking the brunt of the criticism. And you've got a left tackle that's a freshman. And I don't remember when the last time Alabama had, especially under Coach Saban, had a freshman starting at left tackle. I would probably venture to say that it was Andre Smith back in 2007 and 2008, who was a special player, and he ended up being a first-round draft pick. But throwing a guy like Jaden Proctor out there as a freshman and asking him to go against that Texas defensive line, who I think is probably one of the best defensive lines that we're going to see. But you can tell there's mechanical problems with some of these guys, just technique-wise of how they're getting beat, why they're getting beat, and a communication between them and the running backs. Fixing protections or adjusting protections when defenses are shifting. And then you look at the defense. The defense has played well. I think they're probably their best game against South Florida on Saturday. But there's a lot of big plays that are being given up. It's a lot of things that fans are nervous about or are concerned about are justified because you just haven't seen it from Saban teams in the past. When you're giving up 5 big plays against Texas that are over 30 yards, you're giving up 5 sacks. I mean, you just know, and you're losing a turnover battle. Those are the things that over the last, 15 years he's been there has always been the staples of what he talks about that it takes to play winning football. And those things continue to be a problem each Saturday that we've seen so far. So can they be fixed? I hope so. That I've still got a lot of faith in Coach Saban to figure out what the recipe for success is if these players are buying in and trying to improve. And there's a lot that falls on Coach Saban's shoulders, but it falls on these players too. I mean, these guys have got to get after it and figure out what the problem is and try to find the best solution moving forward. Because this next 7 games is going to be a gauntlet. Luckily for us, it seems like the SEC West is having one of the years that you probably didn't expect for them to have. So it's still wide open. But if we continue to make the same mistakes that we've made up to this point, there's going to be some games where it's going to be hard to walk away with a win.
I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I am curious. You're there in Alabama. You've been around the program. You were there when Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator. Obviously, Lane likes Twitter and Lane likes to poke. Were you surprised that he kind of poked the bear a little bit this week? And then along those lines, how do you think that all of the stuff, defensive coordinator, the castle crumbling, all of that stuff, how do you think that gets reacted to inside that building?
Yeah, not surprised at all. He's kind of done this ever since he's been at Ole Miss. And I always look back at even when he was at Tennessee, before he had even been a part of Coach Saban's staff. And he had us on the ropes in 2009 in Terrence Cody goes and blocks a kick for us to win the game against Tennessee, who had no business being in that ball game. And I just remember him walking across the field to shake Coach Saban's hand, and he had the biggest grin on his face, because he was like, "I almost had you." And so I think this means a lot to him, and he does it every single year. It seems like there's always some headline clips from him, and he knows it just kind of frustrates some of the people in the facility down in Tuscaloosa that they've got to answer these questions that he's just drumming up. I think it definitely is on his part on purpose to just cause. And I heard you talking to Brown about it, earlier when you were on with him about what would be the bigger moment for him as making a college football playoff or beating Coach Saban. And I kind of agree with Brown. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the answer is making the playoff, but it might cause him a little pause. He wants to be a guy that can say that he's got a notch on Coach Saban's belt for sure.
Yeah, I told those guys, for anybody that didn't listen, I said it would be the playoff, but I think his follow-up question would be, is there any way, please, that this can include Alabama?
Yeah.
I think if you told him, hey, you can either beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa or lose to LSU or beat LSU in Oxford next week, it's a no-brainer. He'd take the win over Bama and take the L to LSU and then carry on from there. I think you could offer him a lot of different things, and he would. Which is the one thing I always kind of wonder about Kiffin in this game is, does it mean too much, right? Is it is it too important? Because you know this, you played, and when the game's over, you do have to move to the next game. I mean, there's a human thing to linger on it, but you have to move on because the next team, and certainly in this case, the next team's capable of beating you also, and that's, LSU.
Do you think it's like a respect thing for his time with Coach Saban, or do you think it's just this is his kind of his shtick? I mean, he's always been a Twitter guy. It's not like he just comes out of the woodworks for this game, but it's always funny how pointed some of his messages are.
I've kind of got a working theory on it now that I'm starting to flesh together over the course of the last couple of years that I think I'm on to something. I could be completely wrong, and Lane's never going to tell me, so I'm never going to know.
Yeah.
But my theory is that he has a mad respect for Saban, and at the same time is a little pissed about how it ended.
Yep.
A little probably pissed about he didn't get to coordinate that game. Maybe he thinks he could have been a difference in that game. Some stuff like that. I think it's a little bit of everything. I think there was something to the, he was going to go to LSU with that Orgeron. And I just think that's a lot of stuff, right? He got fired. He got hired and fired really by Saban. Not really fired. It was just kind of, hey, go on and go.
Yeah, it's time to move on.
Go to FAU. But I think that stung a little bit, and I think that has stuck with him, and I think he wants to win the game. But I do think the overriding thing is that he has mad respect for Saban, and at some point wants to be able to put that notch on the wall that, hey, I got two. And then I think the other thing, and Brown and them touched on this, is, for the longest time, nobody had done it. And then Kirby did it, and then Jimbo Fisher did it, and then Steve Sarkisian did it. And so now, he's not one of the gang anymore. And so I think he wants that as well.
Yeah, I see.
And then look, here's the other thing, Corey. If for Ole Miss to ever get where Lane says he wants Ole Miss to get, you have a couple of obstacles in front of him, and the biggest one is Alabama. He's beaten every other team in the SEC West during his tenure at Ole Miss. He has not beaten Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, and this is the standard or the bar that Coach Saban has set for the West, and so it's definitely something that you feel like you kind of make it as a coach if you can get that under your belt, and I think the West has, 7-8 years ago, the West was not as strong as it is right now. And Alabama just had this run of dominance. But I always I think about it in a couple of different ways. In some ways, I think it's a respect factor. And it kind of makes me think back of like the way that young boys like to flirt with girls. It's not by complimenting them. It's kind of like going and terrorizing them a little bit. Yeah. And it's like, so it's a sign of respect, or that you appreciate who he is as a person. Maybe it's some of that, or it's like you said, he's a little frustrated by the way things went. And it probably that could be playing a part of it too. But, and I think Coach Saban talked about these losses that he's got to some of his, assistants, and the record that it was a lot of times it was most of the wins were in times when programs were rebuilding. But now you've got guys that have been at programs long enough to really build up some solid opponents. And Lane Kiffin's got a good amount of talent over there. And I think he's a great coach, and he knows exactly how to give a lot of Alabama teams fits by his scheme and finding mismatches. I think he's a phenomenal coach. And I imagine there's, at some point in time, it's going to happen. And he's got a lot of talent over there this year. If they can put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and if we come out and make the mistakes that we've made in the past few weeks, that if you're giving Lane Kiffin more possessions than he should be getting in a game, that just is a recipe for disaster. So, I mean, if you muff a punt and give them a short field, or if you're throwing interceptions in their territory or in Alabama's territory, and you're giving him those kinds of opportunities, he's a guy that can really take advantage of it, just like Steve Sarkisian in Texas did.
All right, last thing, Corey, I really appreciate your time here. How do you see this game playing out?
I think it's going to be like we just talked about. I mean, I think it's, you hope that this team, after all the noise that they've heard this week and over the weekend and all the criticism, and you heard about this players only meeting that happened. And in my opinion, those things can sometimes work well to your advantage. And it just depends on who's leading that team, players only meeting. what's the message in that meeting? Is the rest of the locker room there to buy in to what the message is that's being shared? It could go one of two ways. And then I've seen it work in a positive way, and I've seen it where some guys are just like, man, I don't really want to be in this players only meeting. And it really deteriorates a locker room. So it'll be, it's hard to know. That's the hardest part about this team right now is I'm not sure if I can really predict of what team shows up on Saturday. And it'll be, I can't wait to see what happens. Jalen Milrose obviously got to have a little extra confidence now that he's kind of been named a starter. And if you look at it as, hey, look, they tried to find somebody else to take my spot, and I'm obviously the guy. Now it's my team. Let's go play. Take command of the huddle. Demand respect from everybody in there. Let's go play. And I think the way that they finished the game against South Florida has got to be a confidence booster by putting together some long drives. Maybe that's the spark they needed to have some confidence up front. But I think Lane's going to bring everything that he possibly can to try to have big plays. And he's got a lot of weapons over there. He's got a good quarterback that they've really relied heavily, with his legs to make a lot of plays. And you saw last week, the quarterback from South Florida was able to bust some big runs with his feet. And it's something that's always given the defenses at Alabama problems just because of the man concepts that we try to run. So, you hope that they show up and this run game gets going. It seems like you finally found a running back for Alabama to go out there that can establish the run and get us in short yardage situations to this offense might be able to open up some more. And hopefully Jalen Milroe just tries to make plays with his feet. I mean, he try not to do too much with your arm. If you've got a lane, take off and run. That's one of your better qualities, and it keeps us, with possession of the ball instead of throwing into coverage and turning the ball over. So it can go a lot of different ways. I mean, I saw that we're 7-point favorites, and I'm like, man, I'm not sure about that at this point in time.
Cory Reamer, really appreciate the time very much. Thanks for doing it, and hopefully we can catch you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, Neal. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Again, our thanks to all of our guests, Ryan Brown, Tony Tsoukalis, Cory Reamer, for their time here on this extra edition of the Oxford Exxon Podcast, getting you ready for Ole Miss and Alabama Saturday, 2:30 on CBS at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. We will have post-game coverage after Ole Miss and Alabama here on MPW Digital, and we'll have obviously coverage of the game as well. So probably does it for our coverage for the week. Hope you have enjoyed it. We'll talk to you on Saturday night after the Rebels and the Crimson Tide. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Good night.